staff, they can take a quick roll call.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Devine.
Here.
Rossi Manka.
Here.
Amanda Nowak.
Here.
Eric Torkelson.
Present.
Wayne Clark.
Here.
Kathleen Dagenhart.
Here.
Jessica Katzenmeyer.
Here.
Brian Frank.
Here.
David Roshka excused. And Ben Holt excused. So we have 8 present, including the mayor. So we have a quorum. Thank you.
We have a quorum, thank you. So let's go to item C, will be approval of the minutes from our meeting on December 1st.
So moved.
Say, motion by Commissioner Clark, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Dagenhart. Any changes or amendments to the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anybody opposed? Ayes have it, the minutes are approved. We will move on to item 2A and 2B. And I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Mayor. All right, so item 2A and B is for a special use permit and site landscape and architectural review plan for Ethiopian Coffee Shop. This will be at 7629 West Greenfield Avenue. This is a proposed restaurant use. It's a new tenant in the former Schrader Books building. This is Zone C2, our neighborhood commercial district. A restaurant is a special use in that district, and we have a public hearing scheduled for February 17th. So just some brief history about the site. This is the former home of Schrader Used Books and Music. The property owner has now split this into 3 commercial spaces, and the Ethiopian Coffee Shop will be taking up this westernmost space. This coffee shop will be specializing in Ethiopian-style coffee. The origins of coffee are from Ethiopia, so this is kind of bringing it back to its roots here in West Dallas, but with the Ethiopian heritage there. It's known for its bright fruited and floral flavors. Fun fact. There will also be some non-baked food items that will be prepared in the kitchen. The proposed hours of operations are below 6 to 4 p.m., weekdays and Saturday, and then Sunday closing a little earlier at 2 p.m. So here's an overview of the floor plan. There's some minor adaptations for the coffee shop use. The area in green is open to the public. This includes the cafe seating area up front, and then an updated ADA compliant bathroom in the back. Of note, there is a display area up here on the southern edge of the tenant space that it looks out at the window. That will be getting removed to make way for some counter seating that looks out across the window. We also have a service counter in the middle, and then the prep kitchen in the rear. The site and landscaping plan. So this lot is nearly built out. There aren't going to be any real significant changes to the property. Of note, there is this small rear kind of almost alley-like space between the former Schrader building and this neighboring building. This space is actually part of this property that we're considering today. As you see below, there's currently a dumpster that is outside of this space, and after talking with the property owner and the architect, they've agreed to kind of look into reconfiguring this so that the refuse container is in the public right-of-way, and kind of adapting this space to kind of make it more usable again. Right now there's this dead tree, a pole, and some fencing, as well as a little platform. I think neither property owner really knew whose space it was, and it's just been kind of sitting there, so kind of just adapting that to clean it up a little bit and take that refuse container out of the public right away is being recommended by staff. And we do not recommend a surety bond for this project because there aren't really any significant site and landscaping changes. So then staff recommends approval, subject to revised plans, including specifying the scope of the improvements to the rear yard of the property and the refuse area location, removing that remnant chain link fence, cleaning up some of the weeds, graffiti, the dead tree, and then making sure to maintain some access to those tenant doors in the rear of that property. And then the second condition is just the common council public hearing and approval.
Mr. Mayor?
Thanks for the presentation. Commissioner Clark, go ahead.
Thank you. Question about the cleanup of this alley. The picture certainly reflects a area in terrible condition. And when this is all said and done, will this look good? It's visible from the street. I know you're moving the dumpster back, but will this be cleaned up and looking good?
Yeah, and that's definitely the intent. There's this kind of dead material, just kind of in disrepair, the fence and stuff. That's all going to be taken out and cleared out. There's going to be making sure there's good access for the rear doors. And then this pad right here, which I'm pointing to the screen, they're going to be investigating whether this could be used to kind of hold that refuse container, so that it would be kind of facing these doors here. It'd be a little bit less visible than compared to what it currently is, in terms of just that whole refuse container being available to the public. So we think this would be a good step towards cleaning up this rear space.
Thank you. I'd like to move approval.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion. I'm not sure who got the second on that one.
Got it.
It will be now.
All right.
Any further discussion on this one? I have to say I'm pretty excited about this because we do not have enough coffee in our community. We are woefully under-caffeinated, so this is a great thing.
That is true. That is true.
So all in favor, please say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? The chair votes aye, and the motion carries. Congratulations, thank you.
I just make a quick comment. I think it'll be great to get something else in there besides the shorter books too.
Yes.
It's gonna make it really look nice. So that's gonna be a good thing too.
Yeah, it's a major corridor, a lot of traffic, a lot of people drive through, and it's gonna be good.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, good luck.
Steve?
We'll move on to item 3.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
question for Steve. Can that volume be boosted? We can hear the mayor fairly well, not great, but the other folks I'm not hearing.
I can try talking closer to my little
you go.
microphone here too.
That's helpful, thank you.
Okay, my high-tech system. Okay, so we will move on to item 3. I'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Our next item is a proposed office use at 115th and Theo Trecker Way, basically at the intersection of 116th and Curtis, roughly Curtis Road. There's this existing office complex. There's about a 20,000 square foot space that's going to be utilized by the office use. And office uses are permitted within the M1 light industrial zoning district. What's prompting our review this evening are some site improvements. The rooftop units, there's roughly about 16 or so rooftop units on the north end of the building that are going to be changed, and then new ones will be installed. 5 new ones will be installed on the north end of the building. So there'll be a reduction in the number of rooftop units for the tenant. Additionally, around the portion of the parking lot, an 8-foot tall vinyl coated chain link fence will be installed, and then there will also be some new parking lot lighting fixtures that are updated as part of the scope of work. So you can see in the picture here, this is a view looking to the south, bird's eye view looking south towards Theo Trecker here, and then this is 116th Street to the west, and then Curtis Road branches off of 116th. Rainbow Park, County Park is just to the west, to the right. Example of the rooftop units that are going to be installed on the roof of the building, replacing some of these that are currently there. They're really slightly a little bit larger, but there will be fewer of them, and they're going to be set back in such a manner that they're not going to be any different or I guess more visible from the right-of-way. So we're not requiring any additional screening for these units, as we don't see it's going to be a very significant change. It'll be a change for the better, with fewer of them, more efficient. This is the site plan. Again, 116th Street is in the very top here, and then north is to your right. But so the area of the fence is highlighted and dashed in the blue line here, and The fence, again, is going to be 8 foot tall, no barbed wire, but a vinyl-coated chain link fence. There will be 2 gated access ways. Those are the notes, the O2 designations here and here. So one facing 116th and the other facing Theo Trecker. Again, the fence is going to be set back from these right-of-ways, street right-of-ways, and really just sort of an internal feature on the site. There won't be any outdoor storage. It's going to be primarily passenger vehicles related to the proposed use. There are the lighting, the existing pole lights in within the parking field. Poles will remain. The light fixtures are going to change. And then we've just had some examples of the style of fence here on the lower right. There's a new walkway approach that's going to be replaced and sort of expanded over here in this red demarked area here. But aside from that, those are primarily the changes to the site. And then in terms of just some existing look of the building, there would be a gated, this is looking west towards 116th Street, where a new gated entryway will be. And then just the typical facades of the building, which will remain very similar. On the right side, you've got the existing light fixture in the lower right. That fixture head is going to be replaced with a more contemporary, more efficient LED full cutoff fixture. And we don't anticipate that to cause any issue with light splay to surrounding properties. And I guess in this case, even if it did, it's not going to be really objectionable. This is a light industrial area. So
I'd move approval.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Clark, second by Commissioner Degenhardt. Is there any discussion or are there any questions? Okay, hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? I will vote aye. Also, the ayes have it and the motion carries. Thank you, and then we'll move on to item 4, a right-of-way vacation on Waukesha Road. I will turn it over to staff.
Oops, I think I've got a little issue here with our, a couple slides didn't make it into our presentation, but that's okay. We'll get through this. So with us tonight, we've got Ms. Joan Sternweiss and also Mr. David Schneck. They are property owners along Waukesha Road, and they've petitioned the city to vacate a small portion of city right-of-way southwest of Waukesha Road. It's roughly about 60 feet wide by about 115 feet deep, and it's nestled in between other properties that they own. One that they live in, one property they live in, and then 2 others that flank this piece of right-of-way. And we really we're only speculating as to why this right-of-way exists, but once upon a time, there was an idea to extend part of 122nd Street north from Oklahoma Avenue north past some school district properties to potentially connect over to Waukesha Road. That plan never matured. The city never went any further with it, and nor do we speculate that's ever going to happen. So from the planning department's perspective, as well as the city engineering, we have no objection to the proposed request for discontinuance of this small piece of city right-of-way. It's unimproved. I mean, and by that I mean it's natural. It's a wooded lot, and the applicants here with us tonight, at this point don't have any intent to build upon it or anything like that. It doesn't have a frontage with that of Waukesha Road. It's landlocked between other properties they own. Now, they certainly could combine it with their main residential lot if they wish to someday, but at this time, the city doesn't see any downside to vacating this. So we are recommending that it be vacated. The process is going to include a common council introduction on February 2nd, and council will decide as to whether or not they agree with us, or planning commission or not, and staff, to vacate it or not. If they don't agree with vacating it, then I guess it's done. If they whether they agree or not, they can direct staff to schedule a public hearing and then ultimately make a decision, which will likely be in March after some public notice to abutting landowners and people within the area along Waukesha Road.
Mr. Mayor, a question for Steve.
Go Go ahead, Wayne.
Thank you. Currently, is this property non-taxable?
It's currently non-taxable because it's, city right of way, so
And
this
it
would
will
put it on the
become
rolls.
taxable?
You are correct, yes.
I move approval.
I'll second.
Is that all I had to say?
That's why we. Any other discussion? We did have a motion and a second. Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you for supporting the city in such a heartfelt way with your billfold.
Okay, we'll move on to item 5, the ordinance to repeal and recreate the city zoning code. Turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is an item that we have mentioned to you previously. I think we gave the commissioners an overview of what we intended to do with this update. And now we've completed our first draft of the zoning code update. This was shared via tech review, the tech review emails, I think with the planning commission or with the
Safety development.
with Safety and Development Committee, and it was shared with you guys as well in the staff reports. If any of you would like another copy or would just like it separated from the other tech review documents, feel free to let me know and I can send you another version of those PDFs. Essentially, here's the right-of-way vacation, Steve.
Oh, out of
We got all
order.
those nice
Okay.
slides. We just had one slide out of order.
You relive it here. Okay, all
All right.
right. Okay.
So with the zoning code update, there's a few documents we handed out to you. One of them is just the overview document, kind of gives a summary of what the intentions of our update are going to be and some of the key changes. We have a second document which is going to function as a guide, which kind of details specifically, you can use it to follow along and it tells you where different changes are being made. And if you guys would like to review that, after this, on your own time, and you feel free to reach out to us with any comments or questions about that. That is going to be a useful way to kind of see what's going to be changing from what we currently have to what's proposed. And then we also shared the zoning code itself. And so now we're just going to kind of go through and kind of talk about some of those changes, and feel free to ask any questions at this time, give any comments or feedback as well. So thank you both for coming.
Take care.
Have a
Thank
good
you
night.
very
Stay
much.
warm.
Yeah.
So this is the new outline of the proposed zoning code. Right now, the structure is very different. We have kind of a general or preliminary provisions, general provisions, and then we have our zoning district regulations, which then goes each district by district. And it's really long and cumbersome, and we've found a new way to reorder this in a much more logical sequence where users can really go step by step through the planning kind of process to see, starting with the beginning sections and going on towards the end to kind of get all the information that they need out of our code. So our new structure is going to be section 12.0 is our administration. This essentially is going to be covering some of our preliminary and general provisions, then our districts, uses, structures, parking, and plan development. So now we're going to go kind of part by part. So starting with administration, the changes to this have been pretty minor so far in this draft. Mostly they are language and formatting changes, kind of moving some of those non-administrative elements away from the rest of these kind of general provisions. Some of the procedures have been updated to just reflect our current and best, the practices we want to include. Just kind of, mostly though, it's just updating the language, cleaning things up. So this section, pretty minor changes. The attorney's office is going to be reviewing this in more detail to trim it. I think our Cale Decker has said that he will be probably cutting a significant amount of information in here because it's kind of duplicate information with stuff that's found elsewhere in the code. So things like the intent and the authority section might be struck from our next draft or proposal. So this could change further, but so far really not many changes in this section. So this gets into our zoning districts, 12.1. And so we are proposing several key changes. So first off, you'll notice the table format, which we mentioned before, is something that we're going to be moving towards with this zoning code is using tables wherever possible to consolidate information, make it easier to read, easier for people to understand, and to make it easier for us to change things in the future as well. So right here, this is our proposed zoning districts. You'll notice that the changes are really concentrated in our residential districts. So our currently RE, that district will be merged into RA1. The current RA4 and RB1 will become RA3 districts, or RA3 properties. And then the RC districts are just being combined into one, just called RC. And you'll notice RB is also, this was formerly RB2, will now be RB. And so these zoning districts that we're consolidating really have limited applications in the city and really minimal regulatory differences to other zoning districts. So you'll see RE district, this is only 31 lots in the entire city. All of them conform to the RA1 standards. Similarly, RA4 and RB1, very small number of properties in the city. These would all become RA3. And then the RC districts as well, very small number of properties. So our intent is really to promote the conformance of the existing lots, but eliminate these redundant zoning districts to make our code more efficient, more user-friendly, easier for people to understand, and really make things clearer for our residential properties. One thing we'll also be kind of clarifying in this section is some specific conditions for a couple of our districts. C1 and C2 specifically have kind of a laundry list of conditions that apply to all the properties in the city. We've really taken a critical eye to those and trimmed some of the ones out that don't really make sense as much from our current zoning standards perspective. Our attorney's office has advised us that it would give us a lot more flexibility to take some of these conditions, things like having, right now we don't allow permanent window coverings in C1. We have certain regulations about display rack types. Things like these would be better suited to not be located within the code, but would be kind of general internal review standards that we would be applying to each project. So some of these things will be removed, and we are going to be I guess one key change is that you might notice is that we're going to be extending some of these requirements for C1 into C2. So right now in C1, there's kind of a limit to the amount of floor area that can be devoted to warehousing and storage. We want to make sure that our C1 and C2 commercial district properties are really they're public facing. We don't want them to become warehouses, and we want to make sure that those properties are more, commerce oriented. So the goals of these are just to kind of reduce this code burden when people are going to be using the code and continue to preserve our neighborhood character. And in our next draft, we may further kind of trim some of these conditions. Any questions so far? Okay. The next section is uses, and this one's a little bit longer. We'll spend a little bit more time in here. So right now, in our current code, the uses are kind of listed out along with each district. It's just a giant list, and now we're going to be moving towards a table. This is it's still a pretty big table, but it's cleaned up significantly from the amount of space that we had devoted to this information before. In this table, you'll have the columns will be the different zoning districts, and the rows will be the different uses. And then you'll be able to clearly see if a use is permitted or is not permitted in some way in a different zoning district. So this is a huge change for our districts, for our uses section. It's going to make things a lot cleaner and easier to understand. One of the big things that we've mentioned, I think, previously to the Planning Commission is the updated terminology. So continue to use permitted use, but the terminology special use will be changed to be conditional use upon the kind of advice of our attorney's office and kind of align with the best practices. Additionally, transitional use is really limited right now. We have just a couple of transitional uses, as they're called. This and some other uses will be folded into a limited use. I don't know if that question, or is that just
No, that's me. Sorry.
Okay. And yeah, so let's kind of get into this. So our principal uses we're going to kind of look at these category by category. So first up is residential and lodging. So this is the proposed uses for residential and lodging and their permissions. Kind of a lot of information to take in here, but really the key takeaway is that there aren't going to be we aren't currently proposing any significant changes. We're kind of retaining the same things as we have right now, just updating some of our terminology. For example, community living arrangement. We're using that terminology to better align with state statutes compared to, is it CBRF right now? Is that correct? Yeah. And things like lodging house right now, they're called boarding rooming houses, and this is kind of just aligning, a lot of this is aligning with the state statutes to be, just more consistent. One thing that, and this is something we will want your input on, and something that we're really going to be asking more of the Common Council at the Safety and Development Committee meeting, which will be held in early February, is about missing middle housing. And there's some things that we want, just to have a little more input on before we make any proposals. So one of the zoning best practices that is really become more and more popular and kind of spreading throughout the United States is to allow more mid-sized housing. And right now in West Allis, it's illegal to build duplexes or small multifamily, and over 52%, or in 52% of our residential zoning land. Exclusively single-family districts. There's this national trend where people are recognizing cities and communities in Minneapolis, and especially out west where there's kind of more of a housing crunch. They've noticed that exclusively single-family districts artificially constrain the housing supply, which can inflate housing costs, encourages sprawl, it discourages density, it limits the economic opportunity for property owners. It can also reinforce economic segregation. A lot of times single-family zoning districts exclude people with lower incomes. And then it prevents building kind of desirable housing in neighborhood types. I think all of us can, have seen in West Allis, there's certain parts of West Allis where we have, in our kind of older eastern part of the city, there's a lot more kind of small lots, different types of housing, and there's these desirable neighborhood types that in some other zoning districts can't be allowed. So more North American cities are kind of turning to this European model for housing where there's more density and more of a mix of residential housing types. And so this can boost the taxable value, it encourages density, creates more housing units, and which in turn supports greater population. It gives more choices for people on the housing market, and it just kind of opens up and makes it, encourages more of a free market approach towards housing. So we kind of took a look at what could the city look at from a zoning perspective to allow more missing middle housing. What are our options? And right now, as our draft is, we aren't proposing any changes, but these are just a few things that if there's a lot of support, it's something it would be good to think about. And if there's a lot of support, we could kind of go towards one of these in our actual proposal. So here's just a brief kind of outline of some options. First is the no change option. So we're just looking at these kind of different types of dwelling units or different types of housing types and whether they are allowed in different districts. So right now, our 1-unit dwellings are permitted in all of our RA districts. 2-unit dwellings are considered a limited use. Currently, that means a transitional use. In our proposal, they'd be a limited use. They're essentially allowed only if they're directly adjacent to a commercial use, which is very unusual in those districts. I think RA3 may have some near the edges of some of those residential districts, but for the most part, that doesn't mean a lot of duplexes. And then 4-unit dwellings or other multi-unit dwellings are not allowed in those districts. So some options to consider would be option A, what we'd consider a full extension. This would mean making duplexes permitted outright in all the RA districts. It could also mean allowing 3 to 4-unit dwellings in our RA3 district, and possibly in our RA2 district, kind of similar to what we currently have for the duplexes, where if it's next to a commercial use, then it would be allowed. Option B would be a more partial extension. This would really just mean just really focusing in our RA3 district, making 2-unit dwellings allowed as a permitted use, and allowing some 3 to 4 unit dwellings if they're neighboring commercial uses. And so this one is, we do have a decent amount of duplexes in RA3 that are kind of legal non-conforming uses, and this would be a way to kind of increase the conformance of that without really changing a ton of the neighborhood character that maybe this option A would be. And then our third option is just option C, extension with limitations, and this would be, we don't have a set plan. We know what to hear, what kind of people's input it is, and this could also be something that would be included after the full zoning code update. But thinking about changing the limitations from just next to commercial uses to maybe something different, where maybe it's within 100 feet of the commercial uses. So it's, allowing a little bit more of these types of housing without really expanding it throughout the whole neighborhood. So these are something that, we just want everybody to be aware of, that there's options with this type of thing. I don't know if you guys have any input right now or any questions, feel free to ask those or say those, and then we'll move on to the next part.
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right, can continue.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mayor. Next up is our retail uses, and so we have a few changes here that we're proposing. Right now we have dozens and dozens of retail uses, and they're very specific, and a lot of them aren't very different. And so what we've created are these 3 catch-alls. One of them is existing, this large retail development. If a retail development's over 50,000 square feet, that's staying the same. But we're adding 2 new categories. One is called neighborhood retail. This is for smaller retail uses below 8,000 square feet. And then there's another called general retail, which is for retail from 8,000 to 49,999 square feet, 49,999 square feet. Forgot how to read that for a second there. Neighborhood retail would be permitted in all of our all of our commercial districts. General retail would be permitted from C3 and up, including our manufacturing districts. And then large retail development would be a conditional use in those same districts. For our more sensitive retail uses, we would continue to regulate those as we currently do. So these include alcohol beverage sales, nominal price retail stores, pawn shops, secondhand jewelry stores, thrift stores, and tobacco retailers. These are all retail uses that have different permissions and limitations than those kind of general categories, and we would really keep the same spirit of regulations that we have right now. We think these are really effective, and they work how we want them to. So we would kind of continue to keep those same buffers between those uses and those permitted districts. Any questions here? All right, moving forward. Keep on trucking. Next is the service section, the service uses. So similarly to retail, we had a huge laundry list of service uses before. We've trimmed this down pretty significantly. Mirroring our retail category, there would be a neighborhood service use category, which would be permitted in all of our commercial and manufacturing districts. And then we have a general service category, which would be permitted in C3, C4, M1, M2. Those have the same size standards as the general and neighborhood retail. Then we have a few other uses that are kind of more specific and have different regulations. We have our bar, restaurant, and then we have different things like dry cleaning, food production, kennels, etc. These just that have these different limitations and conditions, but we're pretty much keeping the same for those as we currently have. Next up is civic and institutional uses. There would be a new catch-all category called civic institution, which would include kind of a wide variety of these civic uses, things like libraries, museums, post offices, fire stations, things of that nature. Then we have updated terminology. You'll notice formerly the assembly use we aren't going to be calling it assembly anymore. Upon the advice of our attorney's office, we're going to be kind of more specifically calling out live events and theaters into that type. But really, most of these will be kind of kept the same. We're just kind of regrouping these uses and keeping them in the same locations, and again, trimming things down, making them cleaner, easier to understand. Next up is Parks and Recreation. We're going to be really consolidating. There's dozens, again, of Parks and Recreation uses before. Most of them will fall into a few categories. General park would be a conditional use in all of our districts except for the Park District, and not allowed in the State Fair. Just kind of a, State Fair is only State Fair. Then we have instruction and training facilities, which depend on the size, and then recreation facilities, which depend on being indoor or outdoor, which districts are permitted. One interesting change, and something that we'll be talking about more at the Safety and Development Committee meeting, is that one thing we were able to find out, and again with the advice of our attorney's office, is that indoor gun ranges, I think Kale has mentioned, we'll probably be calling them sport shooting ranges. They can be regulated by zoning districts. Currently, indoor gun ranges is a use, and it's allowed in C2, C3, C4, M1, and M2 as permitted uses. We know there has been, with that one, is it the Shooter's Shop, is that correct? That opened up by Lincoln Elementary. There was a lot of concern from the council back then about how can we, allow something like—
That was Shorty's, I think.
Shorty's, sorry.
Yeah.
About, how can we allow something like a gun shop right next to a school? Obviously, there's been lots of school shootings and things, and that's a huge problem in America. And we, at the time, the attorney at the time was not. Basically, they thought there wasn't going to be any way to limit those. But looking at the state statutes, we do have the power to regulate these uses through zoning, and so what we're proposing to do is limit those, remove them from the C2 and C3 district, can keep them in the C4, M1, M2 districts. That way they will be kind of further from those neighborhood uses, but still permitted in places that make the most sense for them, is essentially our thought. And so we'll be proposing that to the Safety and Development Committee for kind of further discussion. The next category is employment. This is essentially just offices, employment agencies, and then you'll notice this category called workforce development. We're kind of adopting the definition that was made for the what was the name?
Beyond Vision.
Beyond Vision use that was created, just to make it so it's not overly specific for one thing, and make it a little bit broader, and make it kind of to align with the rest of our use updates. Manufacturing uses, we are going to be continuing to use some of those light industrial, heavy industrial uses that were adopted in pretty recently when the manufacturing districts were updated. We will be adding a new use called commercial light industrial flex. Our kind of standard example for this is Able along Highway 100. This is when you have a industrial use that's combined with the commercial use in the same facility, and we want to promote those. So we're going to be allowing them as conditional uses in this larger commercial districts, so C3, C4, and then there would be limited uses in M1, M2 district. Basically, they have to kind of meet certain conditions, and then they'd be allowed there. So that's an exciting change, and there's going to be more information about that, I think, in our packets as well. Medical uses, no changes here. Automotive uses, we're going to be adopting some new use terms here. So automobile parts sales is one, car wash service is another. I know we recently had some convenience stores and gas stations. We're going to be calling these fuel sales now. Then commercial vehicle dealing, commercial vehicle service, motor vehicle dealing. So there's all just some slight changes from what we have currently in terms of terminology, and that was just mostly upon the advice of our attorney's office. We do want some input on some automotive uses in our C2 district. This is one thing we wanted to highlight, and something we'll be discussing more at the Safety and Development Committee meeting as well. Right now, there's two automotive uses that are allowed in C2. Fuel sales, formerly convenience stores and gas stations, and motor vehicle service, so auto repair shops. These are both allowed as conditional uses, and there's not many restrictions. There's just this small, there's this landscaping one for the motor vehicle service. The reason we want to look into these is because we really have tons of these uses in West Allis. So we have 25 upon our count from our map, just looking at through the maps, we have 25 gas stations and 45 auto repair shops in West Dallas. We know that these can be disruptive when they're close to residential uses. We had some complaints about those gas stations that were recently approved, and there's some resident opposition to living right next door to a gas station. So this is something we want to have everybody consider before moving forward. We have a few proposed options here. The first is no change, so just continuing to allow them as conditional uses, or, currently called special uses in C2. Then we have an option A where we just impose a little bit of a restriction in C2, and an option B where we would completely remove them from C2, so they would no longer be allowed in C2. I guess I don't have another slide on this, but one thing we want to note, and staff would not recommend option B because there's both of those uses, they're primarily located in C2. I think auto repair shops, it's over half, and gas stations is just under half. So it really wouldn't make sense to restrict them entirely from their primary zoning district, but it could be something worth investigating to limit them further. So right now, one thing we are considering is creating a little bit of a slight buffer where basically they can't be touching a residential property. That would be, a limitation on that use that we could consider, and it would impact about 20% of the gas stations and auto repair shops would become legally non-conforming with that condition. So it's something that could impact them, not the ones that are currently there, but future ones. So something to consider. And then last in the uses here is our infrastructure and other uses, just kind of, again, consolidating things, cleaning up the language, stuff like that. No significant changes though. In our uses section, we'll also be clarifying the accessory uses. So right now, accessory uses are just kind of listed at the back end of the rest of the zoning district regulations. Now we'd be really clarifying these, pulling them out into their own subsection. We would have a table, this table below, which would show all of the accessory uses and where they're permitted in different districts. A few key things to note is that we would be adding accessory dwelling units as an accessory use. These would be limited uses in anywhere where residential, single family, and two family buildings would be allowed. So these would be limited in that there's just a few design conditions that they would have to meet to be permitted. We'd also be adding solar energy systems and wind energy systems as accessory uses, really just to clarify these. We already allow them, but not having them listed may lead some people to believe that they aren't allowed. So we just want to be as upfront as possible and show that these are permitted or are conditional, depending on meeting our conditions. All right, this leads us into our next section, structures. Let's see. So we would have a table that would show the structure regulations. There's going to be some changes that we're looking at here. First, in our commercial districts, we're going to be proposing to increase some of the density, which will allow for greater taxable value, allow for more desirable projects. As of right now, in this example, we have increased floor area ratio in C2 and C3 from, I believe, from 1 to 2. We also would be proposing increasing some of the height and lot coverage requirements in our RB district to allow residential uses to kind of maximize their property a little bit more. We'd be also generally doing some things to kind of promote keeping things within the neighborhood character. So we'd be reducing some of the front setbacks. You'll note in our, let's see, which district was this that we were looking at mostly? I think in our RB and RA3 districts, we'd be kind of creating these windows, which a new building could put their property. Right now, we have a lot of problems with a lot of non-conforming setbacks in our residential districts. So we're kind of adjusting our figures and creating something where you can't have a house that's really far back in our RB district anymore, just to make sure that everything's kind of consistent with what that neighborhood character already is. This section is we've taken a further look at this since completing this draft, and I think we're going to be proposing some kind of further changes to consolidate and simplify this table. But if you take a look at its current form, it would be good to kind of get a sense of where we're going with it. I think there'll probably be some more changes, but for now, this is where we're at. We'd also include some general stuff for residential accessory buildings and building feature regulations. Upon the advice of the Attorney's Office, some of these here in our residential building may be removed and be kind of considered more as an internal standard to kind of simplify things and give us more flexibility. And then lastly in this section is the regulations on structures and yards. We already have this as a table. We're really just kind of cleaning it up a little bit, updating some of the uses. Of note, we're adding some of these allowed structures like rain barrels, compost areas, and planter boxes upon the advice of MMSD. All right, and then our kind of last big section that we're looking at here is parking. So this table here is our new motor vehicle parking table. We're going to be shifting from a minimum based to a maximum based motor vehicle parking regulations. Right now, a lot of the parking regulations are set, or our parking regulations are essentially set at what is the peak amount of cars you might need at this use, and then we're saying you have to have more than what you would need. This doesn't really make a lot of sense. It fills our city's land with a lot of unproductive empty parking spaces. It discourages development by increasing the cost to developers, and really using parking maximums. This is a best practice in zoning nowadays, and it's a great strategy to grow the city's taxable value and really allow for better redevelopment, especially along places like the Highway 100 corridor. So here's just the example of our table. A lot of these, a lot of properties are going to be just fine, still conforming, and it's really, going to be focused on those really high parking quantities, for places like, I believe like the Home Depot site, those would be the types of uses that would become non-conforming. And so this would just give us that regulatory teeth to prevent buildings from being overparked. And it would allow the marketplace to kind of work out how much parking is needed at each site. We'd also be just kind of doing some small updates to design standards and shared parking regulations with this. Next up is our bicycle parking. This is something, a new feature. We'd be creating these really very light bicycle parking requirements. We don't want this to be a burden for developers, but we do want to ensure that there's secure, accessible bike parking throughout the city, and just create some design and location standards. These are essentially things that we require with a lot of retail or multifamily housing development, and so we want to kind of just put these kind of standards out there so that when people come to us, they know what to expect. And this is something that, right now the motor vehicle parking has to be adjusted at the common council level. We wouldn't want bike parking to become a burden like in that way. So we'd allow the Plan Commission the authority to adjust the bicycle parking requirements at any given project to kind of give us additional flexibility if needed. And then the last section is our plan development section. The biggest change to this is right now we have a PDD1 district, a PDD2 district, and a SBPD district. These are pretty much redundant because all of them, any planned development district is going to have its own regulations for that specific one. It doesn't make sense to have multiple categories. So to kind of align with the modern terminology, plan unit development, we're just going to be having a single planned development district called PUD. We're also just going to be updating some procedures and kind of cleaning the language for easier reading. All right, so that kind of concludes the more detailed overview of the zoning code update. If anybody has any questions or comments at this time, definitely feel free to share them.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
When will this finally go out?
So so the plan is to bring this to our Safety and Development Committee on February 8th for them to give more input and to kind of work through the kind of final parts of this draft, then the staff will be kind of updating that, and ideally we would be sharing this for your vote and approval at the February Plan Commission meeting, and then the early March, the Common Council would be holding a public hearing and a vote. In an ideal world, that's subject to change.
That would be the fastest we could go. I mean, certainly if there's other complications that we need to work out, it could take a little bit longer. But yeah, the goal would be perhaps coming back as soon as February, Plan Commission, and then March Common Council hearing.
Okay.
Any other questions? Anybody talking while muted? All
Do we
right.
foresee any issues with this? Is everyone okay with the changes at City Hall?
Well, we're so far so good, but I mean, there's still time for people to make comments, and but all the feedback so far has been positive. We'll learn more at the Safety and Development Committee meeting to see what kinds of questions and ideas people have.
Yeah,
It looks good. It looks cleaner.
great. That's definitely what we're going for. And we've shared this with our building inspections department. They've kind of pointed out a couple things, but really not had any significant comments. Our attorney's office, we're working with them pretty closely on doing this, and Kale's been a big help in keeping really focusing on keeping things clean and specific. And then I think the only thing we're really waiting on is any from our elected officials, any input they have, and after that point, I think we'll be pretty confident bringing this forward to you guys and the Common Council after hearing that at the Safety and Development Committee meeting.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you. Then that will conclude item 5. We are not voting on that tonight, correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
So we will go on then to item 6, the annual report.
All right, so this is just another discussion item, and really we just wanted to kind of give you guys an update and kind of look back at the last year and see all the stuff that we did at Planning and Zoning and all the stuff you guys did at Planning Commission. So this is just a little dashboard that we created showing some of the highlights from the year. About 1 year ago, we adopted the 2040 Comprehensive Plan. In May, the Neighborhood Greenway Network Plan was completed. In June, the Complete Streets Policy was adopted. July, we adopted new regulations for narcotic treatment service facilities. In November, it was a big month for rezonings along Highway 100, 49 of those rezonings passing. And then in December, the first Complete Streets Subcommittee meeting took place. Some stats for you. We had 9 neighborhood meetings last year, 25 public hearings. Plan Commission approved 40 site landscaping architectural plans. There's 18 special use permit approvals. 60 properties were rezoned. 4 CSMs were approved. 100 occupancies were issued and 49 sign permits. So a lot of good stats there. You'll see on the right here that we had 3 Living Streets murals that went out. Economic Development team took the lead on that project. And we have various training professional development stuff going on as well. And then here's just a little map of some of our kind of key projects from the last year in all parts of the city. And I think there's some discussion about this before, but definitely the year of beer here in West Dallas. Lehman, there were some updates to the Lehman Brewing and Perspective Brewing, and had various approvals as well. So just thank you all, Plan Commissioners, for doing what you do. And we had a good 2021. Despite all the pandemic and everything, still had a lot of good projects go through.
Thank you.
Cool.
And with that, that's item 6.
All right. Any questions on the annual report?
Oh, good job.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like permission to swing the gavel to close this meeting.
Well, it would be difficult for me to do, so if we can have a motion to adjourn.
I got it right here.
I know. And I'm sitting in my den.
I'll
Is there
move
a
to
motion
adjourn. I'll move to adjourn.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Whoa.
Aye.
All right. We're already adjourned, but all opposed.
Thank you.
We are adjourned.